Hey everyone, this is Khalil Masi. I'm here for Martial Art Universe. We're here at the Urban Action Showcase. Now, we're not here to talk about films and action today, but I'm standing here with Vincent Lyn in Charlotte, and we're here to talk about Vincent's recent trip to Syria, his recent humanitarian trip to Syria. So Vincent, first, just inform us, everyone knows who you are as an action star. We're not going to go through it. I know we're not here to talk about that.
Take too long.
Exactly.
Take way too long.
Take way too long.
Exactly. And he's a very humble guy. Just first give us background on the work that you do in general.
Well, I started an NGO, a non-profit called We Can Save Children about 5 years ago. And that came about just because I was doing executive protection work in Ghana, and we were visiting a shelter where children had been rescued from slavery. So from that moment, the look on their faces has always stuck with me, and I wanted to just do more and help more. And through various channels and colleagues and the United Nations and so forth, it took me to many, many parts of the world. And so that in a nutshell is how it's all come about.
How many, before we talk about Syria, how many countries have you visited? How many missions have you gone on so far?
Well, I mean, Syria became my 120th country.
Wow.
I don't do missions in all of those countries, but primarily my focus has been, and especially now, has become parts of the Middle East, specifically Lebanon, the refugee camps in Lebanon. Also work in Jordan as well, and also from East to West Africa, from working in Uganda and also working in Ghana.
Wow. So talk about Syria. Let us know what you were doing recently in Syria.
Well, as the whole world knows, there's been a crisis, a war that's been going on since 2011. I've been wanting to go for quite a number of years. It's extremely difficult for anyone to get, especially from the West, to go to Syria for obvious reasons. Embassies are closed there. They won't allow people to come there. They're not going to give visas out. So it actually has taken me 3 years to actually obtain the visa. And when that happened, much to my surprise, I quickly packed my stuff. I got all these donations that were originally supposed to go to a camp that I've worked with in Lebanon. But once I got that visa, I said, I will bring all the donations to Syria because there's so many that are needy, but certainly no more than the Syrian children. So that's what I did. Yeah.
Unfortunately, or I don't even know which word to use, it happened at a certain time where there's a political crisis going on.
Well,
what
yeah,
were the challenges
the
there?
political crisis, of course, it's been ongoing. There's a political crisis with its neighbor in Lebanon. So that actually, the protests and the demonstrations started the day I arrived. So that was, we were kind of stuck at the Lebanon border going into Syria with protests, people barricading the street and gunshots going off. So yeah, it all happened by surprise, and of course every day in Lebanon the situation escalated more so.
It was, I say it was, right? No. But still fighting going on in Idlib. Yes, this is why we're going around it. And another, I would say, hour and a half, we should arrive in Aleppo. So, inshallah. So, key driver here, Mohammed. Along the way, we've seen a lot of burned out buses, and I saw, passing burned out American Humvees and stuff like this. So there's been lots of things on the way, on the side of the road. But making our way, and not much, hardly any traffic that we've noticed. So all is good.
Charlotte, in terms of, I know you have information in terms of in touch with statistics and such forth. What do the people need to know in regards to this type of work? particularly in this situation? What do the people need to know statistically?
As far as the work in the Middle East,
And what's going on in Syria, the Middle East, just the whole this type of work in rescue, recovery, child abduction, slavery, human trafficking.
well, I think an important thing to remember right now is that there's a lot of unrest in a lot of countries in the world. Sometimes the world wants to focus or vilify a specific region or a specific government or political party that maybe doesn't align with whatever country your political party is. Not even just the U.S. Like this happens in Europe and Latin America. If your government doesn't agree with this government over here, then it's easy for that government or people group to kind of get a bad rap, so to speak. And so maybe their problems aren't seen as important, or maybe they're seen as a little bit more like, well, they brought it on themselves. But there's definitely a lot of political unrest across the world, and there's always opportunity to try and help, and usually like trying to understand people kind of through their own words and their own eyes is a good way to start, and not just accepting things at face value. And so I think that's kind of like what Vincent's mission to Syria was a lot about, was kind of getting to really reach out to the people in Syria and say, I've heard about your struggle, but can you tell me about your struggle in your own way?
Okay.
And so I think that's a really good way, because I mean, nobody, I don't want to say nobody, but most people don't like having other people tell them what their problem is. Or, I'd rather tell you, if I have a problem, this is what my problem is, as opposed to you saying, well, Charlotte, I know your struggle, and telling me, explaining it for me. A lot of people want to have their own voice heard, and sometimes that's a problem right now, is there's not a lot of voice, and it disempowers people, and it's kind of can pull communities apart and disenfranchise people from other neighbors, rest of the world. And so I think, like the Lebanese people want their government to hear their voice, and I think in Vincent going to Syria, he wanted the world to get a better glimpse of the voice of the Syrian people.
What is the biggest misconception that we have, American citizens around the world, in regards to this work? Because we were talking about how people see it and they have their ideas about what's going on, but we really don't know what's going on.
Well, for sure in Syria, I think the Western world has a huge misconception in terms of the issue with Islam and Muslims, and it's so kind of, I mean, the information we have been getting is so like, sorry, but it's mostly propaganda. You go to places like Aleppo, which is one of the, Aleppo got devastated. The destruction is like anything I've ever seen in my life. So we're walking through some little of the devastation here of the city of Aleppo. This goes on for blocks and blocks and blocks all throughout Aleppo. Just pretty damn awful. It's just unbelievable. But here is a city that was one of the first inhabited cities continually for over 6,000 years. I mean, the history of the city, and Damascus too, it's just unbelievable. The historical antiquities, the history, the civilization, the culture. And in Damascus, for instance, you can walk through alleyways and markets for, let's say, a mile or two, and you will see a Christian church and then the Virgin Mary, and then a mosque, right next to each other. Yeah. And you'll walk through like areas where there are Shia Muslims next to Sunni, next to Christians, next to a Jewish section, Marianites, Alawites, all living like harmoniously together, not fighting and killing each other like everyone thinks. And this has been going on for 2,000 years.
So it's a community.
Huge misconception in this respect, like, oh, Muslims are killing everybody.
Yeah.
No way. You have a few fanatical types, the terrorist groups, ISIS and so on, Al-Nusra. But just the same way we have in the West, especially in America, with white supremacists. It's the same thing. You have it's only a very small minority, and I think this is the misconception, especially in the Middle East.
Yeah. I think that's something I would point out is that the first thing I understood about my like Syrian heritage and things is that they've all lived together for centuries. Like all the different faiths, people of different, side by side. That was like where everything, so many of those religions started, and they were fine. So when people say, well, they've been fighting each other for centuries and it's not gonna, like, no, actually they haven't. There's been a lot of peace there, and sometimes it's easy to only see the one side of the picture that you're, I don't want to say that you're being fed, but just the one side of the picture that you know. Yeah.
And the awful thing it's caused, of course, because this is an ongoing war that's still going on, is the humanitarian crisis, which is so massive that we haven't seen this kind of impact or numbers since World War II. And so I think for us as human beings, when we hear of 9 people dying in this or 50 people, we can say, okay, wow, that's terrible. But when it goes into hundreds of thousands, millions, we can't get our head. How can we wrap our head around those kind of numbers? It's impossible. Moving through here, Palmyra, the ancient city. This section is the amphitheater. In front, again, ISIS destroying everything. When ISIS onslaught took this area, they used, after destroying everything and destroying the city, killing everybody, they used this area as a training ground. For working on their tactics and shooting and all this kind of stuff. But in this particular amphitheater right here in front, they captured 25 Syrian soldiers and lined them up on their knees, and they used 12, 13-year-old ISIS indoctrinated young boys, and altogether the young boys of ISIS executed all 25 Syrian soldiers all together at the same time. So that happened right in front here. And it just is like, it's so beyond us to comprehend that we just feel like, well, what can I do about that? I can't do anything about it. So yeah,
So admittedly, I'm one of those people who are not as well versed as I should be on the issues as well, on the well. So what is it that you two think needs to be known? Any question that I'm not asking, what is the most important message that you think needs to get out to the people?
Ladies first.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
I feel like you're passionate about it. I'm sure you have something to say.
No, you're passionate too about this.
Yeah.
Just whatever the most important thing, like what people can do to get involved right now, or what information needs to be known.
I mean, from the perspective you can, is that I took Charlotte to Lebanon. So Lebanon has visited a couple of the refugee settlements, one in Beirut, in Shatila, which is one of the largest, of 30,000 plus, and one in the north in Tripoli, another camp that's like 25,000. And of course, since the Syrian war has happened, the crisis, the refugees it's more than 6 million that fled the country. So they're all over. There's 1 million in Germany, there's some in France, in England, there are 2.6 million in Turkey, there are 1.5 million Jordan, there's 1 million in Lebanon. They're all scattered everywhere because they fled for their lives. You know? So Charlotte has a perspective, at least from the Lebanon side. So you can say what you think of that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was just trying to think of, in the broader sense, I guess, I kind of going back to just maybe being open to challenging your preconceived notions about things and really taking time to listen. And even though there maybe doesn't seem as many Middle Eastern refugees in the U.S. as maybe we once were letting in, there's still a lot of Middle Eastern refugees or Middle Eastern immigrants. Like I said, my family's Syrian and they've been here for generations. And there's places you can go and you can actually just sit and talk and learn from people. And I think having a moment of humility within yourself to say, I'm going to challenge what I know about things and maybe just take a step back from what I've held on to really tight and let someone else tell me their story in their own words. I think that can be really powerful because that's when you find doors to help someone. It's through relationships that he's built and that we've built traveling that we've gotten to go to refugee camps because you usually can't go to the camps. So it's through relationships with individuals that you can really maybe do the most good. Letting someone else have a voice and maybe having a moment within yourself to say, I maybe haven't always been right my whole life. So maybe there's something I could still learn.
Exactly, just reaching out and listening.
Yeah.
For me, I mean, ending with the fact that I was there and everyone was surprised that one person would come all this way, knowing how dangerous it is. Because Syria has been for the past 5 years, the #1 most dangerous country in the world. But everyone I met was so nice and friendly and hospitable. And they would just, when they realized why I came, which was to bring things, donations, clothes, for needy children, people, whomever needs it, that I actually did that. And even though it might seem like it's a drop in the bucket, that I did that. I made the effort to do that. Everyone was so grateful. It was very, very heartwarming. Yeah. So
how's it affecting the children?
How did what?
How was the situation affecting the children? I know you have a passion for children.
Goodness.
I work in.
You mean in Syria?
Yes.
Oh, it's.
Well, tell Ibrahim.
Yes. I'll
Sum it up in a story.
Yeah, sum it up in a story
child.
of one child. In our travels, or my travels throughout Syria, who's become an extremely good friend, colleague. I have to mention his name. He's actually been a tour guide in Syria for 20 years or more. And when the terrorists, he lived outside of the capital city in an area called Ghouta. And Ghouta became very famous in 2012 because of the sarin gas attacks on the people. He happened to be out, a mortar rocket from the terrorists were being fired into Ghouta, and his home got completely destroyed. And they used incendiary bombs, so it completely eviscerated. And he lost everything, everything. And so all he could do was escape with his family and his 3 young boys, and they fled to Damascus. So we've become very close these past 3 years. He actually took us around Lebanon last year. So he was he guided me. We drove all throughout Syria. He's kind of all around fixer. All the people he knows. And his name is Mohammed Al-Kusi.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's just a really wonderful person. We've become really good friends. But on our route from Damascus to Aleppo, really is 4-hour drive if you go straight. But because terrorist groups are still fighting in Idlib heavily, we have to half the highway is blocked, the northern half. So we have to go on a easterly route and then 6.5 hours. So he always makes this one stop, halfway. It's a tiny town called Salamiyah. And it's kind of like a truck stop, a little cafe and a restaurant. And on our way there, I saw this little boy, and he was carrying this kind of a potato sack around with him, and he just wandering around. Kind of wondered what his story, and Muhammad was telling me, you know, his father was fighting. He was killed in action fighting for the Syrian army, and his mother fled, and nobody knows where the mother is. So here's a boy who's 8 years old. So he's only known his whole life of war.
Yeah.
That's all he's known.
He was what, like 9 months old when the fighting started?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
he
on
did
our
it
way
until,
back,
and
we
he's-
stopped by the same spot again, and there he was carrying the sack, and it was empty. And I said, "Well, is he collecting plastic bottles?" He said, "No, he's collecting like steel cans, like aluminum cans, and they melt it for the metal."
Oh,
So we started. I asked, you know, maybe he'll take a photo. So I went to the car to get some candy for him, you know, brought it back, and he sat down and he kind of peeked a smile here and there, and then I took my baseball cap off, put it on his head back. He was really happy, you know? And he sat down and we took this photo together, and you can see the pain on his face. He didn't smile, and then Muhammad said, "Hey, you should smile. You should smile." So we took another photo, and if you see one from the other, you can see how it's a forced smile. You know, you can see the pain and suffering he's gone through. So gave him the cap. Then we found out the owner, who Muhammad knows, allows Ibrahim to hang out there and collect, you know, scrounge for these aluminum cans and so forth. So he has no parents, another orphan of the war. But his grandfather is taking care of him, which sounds like a good thing. But the problem is he can't take the cap home because the grandfather would sell it.
wow, yeah,
Yeah.
of course, yeah.
So basically he's scrounging aluminum, whatever few cents it makes, he has to give to the grandfather. So this is one story, and it was my experience. But there are tens of thousands of Ibrahims all over Syria. Right now, the numbers, just to give you an idea, 22 million people pre-war throughout Syria. Okay, Syria is about the size of the state of Illinois. Okay, now you have half that population. So we're standing on the top of the citadel, which is the largest city within a city in the entire world. If we look beyond, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 buildings there. Most of them demolished. Slightly behind it, you can't really see, is the Sheraton, which is where we're staying, and that was just reopened 1 year ago. At the height, you see the battle for Aleppo. Originally, Aleppo had 4 million, today 2.8 million. So lost like a quarter of the population. So from that point, all the way around, follow me, keep going, and slightly beyond, this was all controlled by various terrorist groups. And actually the Syrian army were on the top here. So terrorist groups were trying to, of course, to destroy this ancient site. Beyond, so even though the Battle of Aleppo ended, I think, end of 2016, but of course the crisis is still continuing. Beyond there, at the horizon, that is about 20 to 30 minutes away by driving, there are 4 terrorist groups engaging in heavy fighting. This morning I was woken up, the building shook. So the Syrian army is somewhere firing mortar rockets in that direction. So you could feel the concussion. And that's 30 minutes drive from where we're staying here. So, and the building is big, but the whole building shook, and I felt there were 3 that went off this morning, right, Mohammed?
Right.
Okay, so he felt it too. Now, Mohammed's used to it. He was sleeping like a baby. I felt it, and it woke me up. 6 million fled to other countries. Their lives are in limbo. 7.5 million are displaced throughout the country because of the destruction and devastation. 2.5 million children are homeless. And probably at this point, 200,000 are completely orphaned. So those numbers are so monumental. We can't wrap our heads around those numbers. It's just out. This is incredible. So they're,
How? So, hello.
Hello. Well,
how can people like how can people get involved in the work that you guys do in any way, shape, or form?
Well,
whether it be donations or something, clothing, spreading the word, whatever.
yeah, I mean, you can contact me through wecansavechildren.org. You can contact me through Facebook. I mean, that's the easiest way. Yeah.
And also, there's like try looking up like local refugee organizations, because like everyone, if you're like all over the country, sometimes it's easier to do something in your local community. So whether it's welcoming refugees, maybe like babysitting, helping someone with a business resume to help find a job, because like refugees want to have work and want to support for their families. So there's little things that maybe you don't have any monetary to give or whatever. There's always reach out to helping, and even just like welcome letters and things like that is sometimes great for your local community.
Just reaching out and being a human being.
Yeah. Just keep being you, but be the best version of you. Be the most human version of you.
I think what happens is people just see the immensity of, and just it seems just too big for us all. So we just kind of go back to what we were doing.
Yeah. Sometimes you want to shut down. It's so big. You just what
And
can I do? Little old me.
We get
little old me,
complacent
what
and
can
we
I
go
do?
back to our whatever we're doing, and so we feel like, oh, this is I can't do anything, but that's actually completely untrue. As a group, we can do so many great things. I mean, so if one person can do, many others can do.
Well, I want to thank you for
And
your
I
work.
must show this.
Oh yeah.
Because
Okay, there we go. Okay. So
Syria.
I want to thank you for your work.
Oh, thank you, Khalil.
Thank you.
Thank you,
All
Khalil.
right.
Thank you for your work.
Definitely. It's Khalil Masi with Vincent Lyn in Charlotte at the Urban Action Showcase, and they're doing great work. And just pay attention, look for them in the information that was shared with you social media, and help out in any way you can. Spread the word. Go home to your own community. Reach out to people who are in need. Let's make this world a better place.
Alamak, inshallah.